Good morning.
Hey, what's up good people, it's YellowMotion here and welcome to a very special Devil May Cry 5 video. I recently had the great opportunity to interview composer and producer Jeff Rona, who we all know from the well-known track Crimson Cloud, V's battle theme from Devil May Cry 5. And we talked quite a lot about the track, on how it was established and produced, how long it took to make it, and what went on behind the scenes. So things like if the track really had a meaning towards the story of the character, and why the track was called Crimson Cloud in the first place. That and much more have been answered and discussed by Jeff. So I'm gonna say this up front guys, I highly recommend for you to watch this video after you have fully finished Devil May Cry 5 and know the story, because our interview will contain spoiler talk and story plot points and plot twists. So before we start guys, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel with the notification bell turned on to keep up to date with more DMC5 content. Alright, great, let's get right into it. So yeah, first of all, Jeff, it's an honor to have you here and be able to do this interview with me and see from there on where it goes.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much. It was great to hear from you, and I'm excited to talk about my music from the game.
Maybe you could kind of in a nutshell explain who you are, how you got into the business, and how you transitioned into doing scores and music for gaming as well, and eventually how you got this job to create the track for Devil May Cry 5.
Okay, that's a great start. So, number one, my name is Jeff Rona, and I'm a composer. I started off more as a musician here in Los Angeles, programming synthesizers and drums, first in the record business, working with record producers and artists, but transitioned to working only with film composers and TV composers. And for many years, I was just the guy creating the cool electronic sounds and samples and rhythms that you were hearing in all kinds of film scores, and I worked with a lot of great composers. The most well-known one is Hans Zimmer, who I worked on quite a few projects with him over a period of about 10 years. But because of the nature of my work, composers really relied on me for very creative work. It wasn't like being a guitar player or a trumpet player. What I do really creates the sound and the style and the feel of music. So over time, I went from being a musician to being a ghostwriter. And that means that I wrote music for movies and TV shows, but not with my name on it.
Okay.
Eventually, my name got better known, and some of the composers I worked with started recommending me. And I'd already done so much work that people could rely on me. So a little more than 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago now, I've been doing this a while, I became a composer under my own name. And it started off in television, and I've done hundreds of episodes of television, everything from drama to fantasy and horror. Not too much comedy. I guess I'm not too funny as a musician, and that's okay. I've done a few comedies, but mostly it's been drama. And I've always been looked at as somebody who could do something unusual, maybe a little courageous, maybe a little experimental. And I became good at blending very experimental electronic elements with guitars with a rock influence, and orchestral instruments for an orchestral influence. Because I'm a woodwind player, and because I play instruments from all over the world, and I have a community of world musicians around me, I've also been known for bringing world music into all those elements. So maybe a little bit of everything, but over time it really I think I developed a sound that became noticeable, that people said, oh, I know what his music sounds like. Before Hans Zimmer, I used to work with Philip Glass, and I worked in the classical minimalism world for a while. And so anyway, I have a lot of influences, and it all led me to the career of working in film and television. And I've been doing that very consistently. Video games came much later.
Okay.
And it started off just doing some arranging on some games, going all the way back when I was very young. I'd worked with Hans Zimmer on The Lion King. And the first thing that happened was to adapt the score as a game. So that was my very, very first experience. And that led to a few other things. I worked on some Transformers games. And then I helped out on a couple other things. And then I knew some of the people at Sony PlayStation. My studio was really, I could walk to the Sony PlayStation studios here in Los Angeles. And I was there visiting some friends, and they were working on a game. And it was interesting to me, and I met the director of the game, and it was God of War. But the game had already been in development for a very long time. And the director of the game said, well, I'd love to hear your music. And, I'd worked on movies like Gladiator and some other things and some TV movies with big epic scores. And he said, oh, I really like your music. I'm really sorry there's no opportunity to work on this game, but we have our team. It's the same people who did God of War 2, and this was God of War 3. He said, I'm really sorry because we're in good shape. And then he calls me up again a couple of weeks later. He said, we don't have any place for you on the game, but would you be interested in doing a trailer? And I said, yeah, sure, that sounds like fun. So he goes, great, we're going to have you do the trailer. They sent me the video. I wrote a theme, and it was an original theme for the trailer. And he says, this is great, thank you. And the trailer goes out. And he calls me a couple of weeks later. He goes, there's no room for the game because we have our team and everything's set. Really sorry, but that theme, everybody really likes that theme. Do you think we could put it in the game? We'll give you, we'll pay you a couple of dollars to put the music into the game. I said, sure, that sounds great. So I made a few changes to the music to make it a little more compatible with the game and not the trailer, and that was it. And then he calls me again a couple of weeks later, and he said, we have our team. We can't really hire you for the game, but that theme you wrote, we really like it. Could you do a slow version of it and a fast version of it? And I said, sure. A couple of weeks later, he calls me and goes, look, we really want you to do more. And I became part of the God of War team, 5 of us. And I ended up writing as much music or more music than the rest of the group. And that was really my first deep work on a video game, God of War 3, which is maybe 8 years ago. From there, I've done a few other games, not a lot, but I worked on Far Cry, which was a great experience. And then a couple of small games. I did a couple of games in Asia. They're not out yet, so I'm not allowed to say the name, but it's a very, very popular game in Asia mostly. It's not so well known in the US. And then a couple of years ago, I got contacted by Capcom, and they were familiar with my music, and they mentioned that they're working on a game, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. This came out early last year, but I worked on it almost 2 years ago now. And for that game, what they really wanted wasn't original music. The game was to celebrate 40 years of Street Fighter games from Capcom and Marvel games. They wanted to make Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite a very modern sounding game. So they said, here are these 30-something themes. We want some to be EDM, some to be rock, and some to be orchestral. And so for several months, we took these themes and I put together a small team. So I functioned more as a producer.
Okay.
And I chose a small team of EDM, rock, and orchestral composers. A lot of them from the music trailer world, from the movie trailer world, because of that impact. And so we worked on that for a few months, and it really went well. It was really successful. They were incredibly happy. So that brings me to, they came back and they said, well, we loved what you did on Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. We have a new game, and they didn't tell me the name of it. They said, would you be interested in writing one of the main themes of this new game? And I said, of course. And that's what brought me onto Devil May Cry 5.
Okay.
So that's me, not in a nutshell.
but very briefly.
That's a short history of how I got up to Devil May Cry.
You did also work on Resident Evil 2, the recent...
Yes. Because same situation with that. They came to me and they said, well, we loved you as a producer on again Marvel vs. Capcom. We want to do this rock piece for, again, they wouldn't say the name of the game, they just said a well-known series. And they said, well, would you produce the music? They let me have the choice to score it.
Okay.
But once they started talking about what they were looking for, which was 90s style grunge rock, I knew people here who are so much better at that. So I wanted to have the role of producer, meaning that I would oversee everything about it. I would first choose a composer. I would put the band together. I'd put the recording sessions together, and I would have final say in all the creative and technical aspects of creating the end title. We didn't even know at the time what it was exactly, except that we knew the style of music they were interested in, and they mentioned a few artists and bands that they thought were similar to what they were thinking about. But they really let me have complete control over how to make this piece of music happen. So I produced it really much the way a record producer works on a track, putting together the artists and having the end goal kind of in my mind, and then making sure that it happens.
Okay, yeah, great.
And the same is true on Devil May Cry 5. I was also asked to work. So I did the theme music, the battle music for the character V.
Yes.
But they had already, before they contacted me, they'd already done the theme for Nero.
Yes.
And the song
Devil
Devil
Trigger.
And I know Casey Edwards and his wife Allie, who sang, and that had already happened. They did that super early, but they said, well, we want you to do Dante and V, are you interested in? And I kind of felt the same thing. I understand rock music. I've used elements of rock music in my film scores, but I don't consider myself at the level of being like a really great rock writer. So actually, I went to my same collaborator from Resident Evil. And actually, we did, Devil May Cry came before Resident Evil in terms of art. But he's Cody Matthew Johnson. I trust him so well. So, and plus, I would be involved again in every creative and technical element. So that's what I did. I brought somebody in to work on as a writer for Dante, but I really was excited to do the V music, and that's how that worked out.
Okay, so you were pretty much giving the opportunity to make the scores for Dante and V, but from your experience, you were like, I know somebody who is a better fit for Dante, and you were really more attracted to do V.
Absolutely. Plus,
yes,
I'm not
okay.
a guitar player, and I felt one of the things when I really started to understand what Capcom was thinking, I felt it's got to be a guitar player. It can't be just a composer. It has to be somebody who will actually write the song with their fingers on a guitar. It was the only way that it would be as organic and full on in style.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting because for many of us fans, it's been like 10 years since we finally get to see this new real true Devil May Cry game, and for the first time they introduced this third mysterious character, and Capcom themselves, they have pretty much hyped him up, gave little hints into the music videos and such, until we, finally played the game and find out who this character was and what his identity was. So, because this is going to be spoilers, so you can pretty much say anything what you want.
Well, the game's been out for, a weekend.
yeah, pretty much.
Days.
So, what was the briefing to you for you to get to understand and how to tackle this job?
Well, Capcom sent me a really beautiful story.
Okay.
In an email. It wasn't very long. It was maybe less than 2 pages. And it was their vision of V. And I don't really want to go too deeply into what they said in the letter, but the letter was a short story. And it described the personality and the struggle and the goal of V. But it did not mention where V would end up.
Okay.
It wasn't really about Virgil. It was really about the conflict inside of V, and this idea that there was an internal battle as well as an external battle, and the idea that V was complicated and had 2 sides.
Yes.
And that was, to me, the most interesting thing, because I think that's something everybody can relate to. The idea of an internal battle that makes us who we are.
Yeah.
So, again, it wasn't a very lengthy, wasn't a very long description, but it was everything they felt was important to them about how they wanted to inspire me musically.
So from my understanding, you had very much creative freedom in coming up with something very unique, fresh and new. And yeah, you were pretty much told ideas and kind of thoughts and not exactly like story plot points. Did you kind of knew the plot twist of the game regarding the character, or?
Yeah, of course.
Was that a important part to it, or was it something?
Yeah, but it's a plot twist. I can't put it in the music.
No. But for yourself, like, okay, I have to take this into consideration, but not express it.
No. I felt that it was important not to.
Okay.
And Capcom felt it was important not to. They explained it on the first day that, the first time we met in person. They said, by the way, we want you to know what the evolution is of this battle, and so they made it clearer. I understood it in a very basic way from that very first letter I got from them, and they explained it in more detail. So of course I knew it from the beginning, but it wasn't what drove the creating of.
Yes, yeah, that's what I wanted to know.
It was
because
really key not to even think about it. Does that seem strange?
No, I think not at all, because I see V as V, and eventually story-wise you kind of understand that it's this person, but it's not that you have to kind of take it into account. Kind of that thanks but no thanks feeling, kind of like.
Well, look, there are these little things in the lyrics. I split myself in 2. There's
yes.
Definitely, but that could mean so many different things.
Yeah, that could be.
I thought of it more as strength and fragile. And a lot of the way I looked at the song and the lyrics was this idea of we each have a strong side and we each have a fragile side. And you need both to be who you really are. You need to have vulnerability, but you need to be able to defend. And from a world that has whatever dangers, worlds have. In video games, it's monsters. In real life, it's, people who are just, people who suck. So I was really focused on this idea of, within each of us is the strong and the fragile, the aggressive and the vulnerable. And you need to have both to make sense. And I produced the video, and I wanted that idea to be touched on a little bit. So, there's a lot of split screen, like kaleidoscope in the video.
Yes.
And it was that same idea of splitting something and mirrors, the left side and the right side, the upside and the downside. And I think that's all in there.
Yeah, it's really great.
I think enough of that is in there.
For sure. I think it does really justice to the character itself, and the way I played the game, and when I found about the plot twist, it was more like, oh, okay, I kind of saw that coming, but to me, every time when I see V, he feels like his own character, his own identity, even though you understand for narrative purposes. But it still feels like, with his battle theme and everything, feels like a separate entity, and the way you kind of describe your work process and how everything went down pretty much is a separate thing, and that's really, really good to know.
Okay, well, then maybe we pulled it off the way we hoped.
The next thing, which is the track itself, it's very different than the theme of Nero and the theme of Dante.
That's important.
The lyrics are by Rachel Fannin, written by her.
She and I did them together, but she is the main lyric writer, yes.
So how was that whole process of creating the track? Where did it start? Did it start with the lyrics or with musical pieces?
No, it started with me writing a track of instrumental music. And
okay.
I only wrote I think 2 ideas for Capcom, and they picked the one that is now Crimson Cloud. So I wanted to give them a couple different feels, but it was very quick to land on something that they felt was the feeling that they wanted. And that had no vocals, it was just the track. If you take the vocals out, it's that, although it grew and grew and grew over time, and I'll explain that later. But so I wrote a track, it gave the feel of the piece, and then we really did a long exploration to find the right singer.
Okay.
And they were thinking, of metal and hard rock and industrial rock singers, and we looked at a lot. I was on YouTube for like a week, and SoundCloud and Spotify, and just, it could have been anybody. We really had any options we felt were right. We were looking for the right singer. And we reached out to a couple of people, and we started talking, but I was never really satisfied. They wanted somebody fairly well known, if possible. It wasn't critical, but the game is a very high profile game. But I've worked with Rachel Fannin on she's sung for me on 2 or 3 other scores of mine. And I've known her for a very, very long time. And I admire her so much as a singer, as a songwriter, as a lyricist. I just think she's a great artist. And I sent some of her music. She's had a very eclectic musical background. She's done more experimental things. She's done very quiet music, piano and voice. She's done a little retro. She's an experimentalist, I think, kind of like I am, but more in the pop world, whereas I'm more in the cinematic world. And her work, they liked it. They said, give us 3 choices. So Rachel was one of 3 that I felt confident in. And I was so happy that they agreed with me that even though there were 3, there was really only 1. And that one was Rachel. So we got Rachel on board, and I played her the track. She read the letter, and I was shown about a 60-second clip. And the 60-second clip was just V in battle with Griffin and Shadow. But it was very crude. It was very early rendering. So the animation was poor. or not poor, but just very, very raw, but it was enough to understand it. And then one day, the Capcom, all the producer and director and audio director of the game were in Los Angeles, and we met. And for the first time, I got to see a few little elements of the game, a little more rendered. It takes years for them to develop all of the look of the game. It's so complicated, and I think this is maybe one of the most visually ambitious games I've ever seen. So the lyrics and the way everything connected was more visual than character or story. Actually, I would say it's visual, and literally the title of the song was Crimson Cloud because the first thing they showed me was a battle with a red sky. And I just love it. It's so touching in a way. It was so unusual, this battle in this city under this red sky, and it was a cloudy red sky. And I said to Rachel, I said, I was watching it and there was this, these crimson clouds. Okay. And she goes, let's use that. Let's start with that. We talked about the idea of a dual character, somebody who's, so the idea of, split myself in two. There's a few other lyrics that touch on it, but I have to say, most of the lyrics are really describing the feel and look of V's world and V's battles.
Okay.
There's a little bit about his character within the lyrics, but very little or nothing, almost nothing about the story, because I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's necessary to tell a story in lyrics. That's not what lyrics are for. Lyrics are there to convey a feeling, not tell you what's about to happen or what did happen, because the lyrics would either be in the past or the future, never now. You don't know what words being said during what moment in the game, because it's real time, it's interactive. So there's no point in having a lyric spoil what's going to come later, and there's no point in having a lyric say something you saw 5 minutes ago. So I don't believe in the need to have lyrics tell the story of what's happening. In essence, you'd be telling the story twice.
There have been a lot of theories and speculations going on ever since the game was pretty much revealed. And one of the things was that there is a kind of a consistency between the three battle themes, and V's battle theme, and especially the lyrics, were probably, I think, the most kind of ambiguous.
Yeah, that you bet.
Everybody wants to know, like, who is this character? And it's very interesting that you say that the title was Crimson Cloud because of what you saw. One of the things many fans thought that it was a direct reference to one of the huge arch enemies of the series, which is Mundus.
Well, it must be very disappointing. It must be very disappointing to know that the answer is so much simpler than that.
But besides that, also V's demons, his familiars, Griffin, Shadow, and Nightmare, are also a direct reference to Devil May Cry 1. So it kind of coincidentally had a link with each other. But
yeah, I didn't know that, by the way. When I wrote the song, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I think that's a very big coincidence.
By the way, I should mention that the creative team for DMC5 did not want me to reference anything in any previous games, either lyrically, musically, or in any way.
Okay, yeah, that's very, very interesting.
They really wanted a kind of a fresh start to this theme. They didn't feel it wasn't a continuation of anything. It was, the first time this character was going to have a musical theme. It was the first time this character was an important playable character. So, so yeah, they didn't. In fact, they asked me not to. use any previous elements of any previous games as inspiration for what I did. So it's fresh, we hope.
I think it's interesting because right now that people know that V as a character is kind of the human side of Virgil, the lyrics have still meaning if you now look it back. But it's good that you say that it's not like that.
Here's the thing about lyrics is if you're too literal, too specific, then you give the listener nothing to do. The whole point of the lyrics of a good song is to give images and ideas that the listener can do something with. So the whole point is not to be literal. It's not a book. It's not a story. It's a song, and a song is different. So I'm happy to know that the lyrics of Crimson Cloud bring up different ideas to different people, because that's what a good song should do. Any good song should mean one thing to you and a different thing to me, based on the same lyrics, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Are you actually familiar with the series? Have you...
I know very, very little about it, to be honest with you. I was familiar with it. I've never played it. I've seen people playing it on videos. And I really made it a point not to get to know it any better while I was writing and working and producing.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a little bit naive because otherwise I think I would have fallen back on good ideas that were already in the game, which is exactly what Capcom didn't want. So I feel lucky that I knew less about the game than, well, anybody who's played it.
Yeah, that's actually really fitting with the character as well, and then that also makes sense why you said like, oh, for Dante I'm gonna give that to Cody, because people already know that character and have certain expectations to kind of his style and his music.
Yeah. That was a much harder project. That Subhuman was much more difficult for exactly the reason that you say. Capcom also wanted a new theme. They didn't want to touch on the previous themes, but it is a well-known character. It is a very well-known character.
Yes.
And you know, there's this whole idea of, you know, painting a mustache on the Mona Lisa. You know, you push one pixel to the left, and suddenly you know everybody's freaking out. Yeah. So, and I have to give credit to Capcom. They encouraged us to push things a little hard. And they said, every Capcom game and every Devil May Cry, except for the first one, has had people hate the music. Everyone. Because of those people who hate anything to change. They want the familiar, they want the repetition, and the director of the game says, I refuse to just repeat myself. I refuse to recycle these things. I can do whatever I want. And what I want is a fresh idea. So the Dante theme and the Nero theme in its own different way, I think convey the feeling of the characters from previous games, but not the music of the characters in previous games. They had the option to bring in the same composers and have them just do a better version, you know, polish it up, make it sound a little more, you know, 2019. And they had that opportunity, and they knew they had that opportunity, and they've decided absolutely not. They don't want to repeat themselves, even though it's been very successful for them. I think the worst thing any creator can do is take something that was successful and say, oh, let me just do it again, and it'll be successful again. You know, that's exactly what ruins an artist.
Yeah, if it's not broken, why fix it? Kind of that mentality.
It is a little bit, you know, and so to their credit, Capcom really gave everybody just the right amount of freedom. You know, it's a collaboration. I wrote things and I would get notes. This is too big, this is too small, make this darker, change this, add a drum here, take it out here. I would get big notes, I would get small notes. I mean, it took months to create the final version of the game. And they asked for a few changes to the lyrics and suggested a couple of lines and had us take out a couple of lines. And so it all came together very well. They were happy. They felt that they had the control they wanted, but they felt that they had a fresh perspective to everything.
Yeah, for me personally, is what you said, like the scores of Devil May Cry 1. For me, it's actually Devil May Cry 1 and 3 had the best scores. I think everybody has heard good reception about the overall music of Devil May Cry 5, because when I played with Nero, Dante, and V, it's not only in the battle themes itself, but also in their cutscenes. Like very subtle, you hear the kind of the intros and the outros, and I can imagine if like one theme didn't work, then pretty much Total Form wouldn't work as well. So I think everybody has done a good job, and people are kind of really surprised with how good and different V's theme is.
I'm very happy to hear that. I haven't been out on the internet that much, about it, but I'm really happy, and I've heard enough that people have been happy with Devil Trigger and Crimson Cloud and Subhuman. And it's very typical in a video game for a composer to write hours and hours of music. In this game, it's amazing how different that is. Instead of writing hours and hours of music, I wrote this one piece. But I wrote it in such a way that they could take it and reuse it in all the cutscenes and in so many other parts of the V story. So a piece of music that's only about 5 minutes long actually makes hours of gameplay, and you don't get bored by it because of a kind of a brilliance of the way Capcom treats music with their game engine. I wrote the theme in such a way that it could create hundreds of variations. There's a thing called stems, where every element of the music is delivered separately, and each one has many variations inside of it. So it's like a grid of different ideas in one direction and different ideas in the other, in time and in sound. And because of that, they were able to take a relatively small but very dense piece of music and respin it into not countless, but an amazing variety of scenes and battles and pieces that typically they would get more music and more music and more music. In a way, it ties it together in a very different way than many other game scores.
One of the things of the game is that whether you're playing with any of the characters, the music has to kind of instantly change depending on how you play and basically how you rank up the styles. So if you do lots of combos and play stylish, then maybe you suddenly hear the chorus of the track.
Well, what's interesting is you're absolutely right. And what's interesting with Crimson Cloud and Devil Trigger and Subhuman, we didn't think of the songs as traditional songs, as you have choruses and verses like you would have in a pop song. Instead, because of the way the songs were composed and arranged, and because of the technology inside the game engine, every time you play the game, the lyrics change. You actually sort of, as you get better at V and as you get better at the battles, you sort of unlock more lyrics and more lyrics. And it becomes, so there's certain lyrics that come later, and it's because you've gotten, there's certain things that get said only after you have put in the time to really achieve a certain level of quality in your play. Mm-hmm. So it's truly an interactive song that changes as you change as a player, and I love that. That's an amazing. I've never done anything like that. It was very complicated for us to pull off, and but it creates a very unusual way to use music with lyrics and singing, in a game. Very few games are so driven by vocals.
Yes.
In this sense of pop vocals.
It's very done well, like the transitions and everything. You never feel like, oh, it's kind of skipping immediately to the chorus,
No,
or
it's
how the transition is done is really great. And my thing was like, did you have to take in account for...
Oh, I had to do that.
Yeah?
They gave me a kind of a map. Once the song was about halfway done, it had lyrics, it had melody, it had vocals, it had the basic structure of the music that I'd written. They said, okay, we like everything. Now here's how we need you to lay it out. We need an intro that's quiet, then an intro that's loud, and then a transition that's 4 beats and one that's 16 beats. And it was dozens of sections. And I laid them out end to end, but it didn't really matter what order I wrote them in. It sort of sounded a little bit like a song, but it's very different than the version that you hear in the video, if you've seen the music video.
Yes.
Or on the soundtrack album, which I don't know if it's come out yet. I think it comes out soon, or it's out now. But the structure of the song was an edit that we did just for listening. So the music video and the soundtrack album are one version of the song, but the song as it exists in the game is many, many times more complex.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think it's really good because it's something with movies and games or any other medium. When you feel that something is off, you notice it. But with this, it's really done well with the tracks and...
Yeah, it would have been so easy. It would have been so easy to just loop.
Yeah, I can imagine.
A good piece of music, right? You have something and you loop it. Maybe you fade in parts or not. That would have been the easy way to do it. It took them months and months of programming, of writing code that actually fits the music almost beat for beat, so that the interactive ability of the music in the gameplay is so advanced and so seamless. You really don't notice that the song is always changing. And as you play, in a way that's just, I don't know that it's been done like this before. It was a lot of work to write it, but what they did to make it what it is just spectacular.
I think there have been kind of games that kind of transition into kind of the instrumental stuff, but
sure,
I don't think I have ever experienced this much in a game where it not only is incorporated into kind of the character's theme, but also like the whole story parts. For example, listened so much to Devil Trigger that I could hear it in all of Nero's cutscenes, and with V, I actually had to play it for a second time where I was like, hey, now I get it. And the same goes for Dante with Subhuman, because you would think, oh, we have a cutscene and it's kind of a separate made score, but it's actually the main theme, and I really love that.
Oh, good. Well, then I guess all that work paid off.
Yeah, for sure. So what were the biggest struggles with the whole creation of Crimson Cloud? Like you say, it took months and months.
Yeah. So like I said before, I only wrote 2 ideas, and they accepted one of them. And from there, it's just like filling in more detail and more detail and more detail. And then sometimes they'd say, okay, we've decided to take this part out, but we need you to do a new section. So as the developers were continuing to understand how they could use the music, they would keep adding more sections and more ideas and more transitions and more little tiny details. So it's kind of like a zoom lens, It started off as, okay, you've written the sketch, we like the sketch. Mm-hmm. Okay, now you've added a voice, we like the voice. Or, okay, change this. Then zoom in more, okay, we need more lyrics, we need another section. Zoom in more, okay, we love these bass parts, now we'd love to hear some other sounds. So there's more than 100 tracks in the music that I wrote. It's a very, complicated piece of music with maybe 20 different kinds of drum beats, industrial noise and weird samples of weird sounds, my analog synthesizers that I guess you can kind of see a little bit in the picture here, but my vintage synthesizers, my plug-in synthesizers. So building, and then on the voice, Rachel came to the studio. This, stood right over there. She sang demos, and you know what? Almost all of those demos are actually the final. Some of the parts of the song were literally the first time she sang. Okay. And even though the Capcom team came, and we did re-record it, we were so happy with some of her original things. But even her voice, I chopped it up and I distorted it and I turned it into things that don't even sound like voice. So there are parts of the song that are the voice, but they just sound like aggressive, distorted noise. So there's so many different kinds of distortion and overdrive and glitching and chopping and filtering and flipping, all the stuff I love to do. It's very much my way of creating music, and so the process was one of weeks and weeks of refining, adding, refining, listening, deciding what works, taking something out, replacing it, making it a little better. We think you can make this part a little better. So, over weeks and weeks, months really, came, the final thing. Then we did the final recordings with Rachel. We used only a little bit of it. And then we went to mix it. And, with this kind of music, the mix is really, really important. We used the same engineer who mixed Subhuman. He's a great rock engineer who's mixed platinum albums, and he's a producer and he's super good and he did a great job. But even then, Capcom had little tiny fixes, because they had something in their mind that they couldn't explain to us in terms of how their game audio engine was going to take these hundreds of elements and create hours of music from 5 minutes.
So what was kind of your inspiration to kind of start with V's track? Like how do you usually get into your process of, okay, let me get a feel of... it always starts with an open mind and a blank screen and a willingness to experiment for as long as it takes. And how long that takes doesn't matter. I knew that they really had this idea of industrial noise and industrial rock really as the beginning. So with the idea of industrial rock, which is that's a very general thing to say, doesn't tell you a lot. But it tells you that it's going to be aggressive, it's going to be distorted, it's going to have, a lot of very loud bangs and clangs and drums, and it's going to be very drum-oriented and not very guitar-oriented. There's almost no guitars in Crimson Cloud. They come in literally in the last parts it's not necessarily the last when you play the game, but there's only one small section where there's guitars, and even then they're buried just to sound like aggressive noise. And by the way, my guitar player was Cody Matthew Johnson. So it's not about guitars. It's about electronics and distortion and drums and noise and the sounds of drills and tools and vocals, and a lot of processing on the vocals to make them otherworldly and weird, if you will, and that's really the beginning. The beginning is we think industrial is kind of your starting point. Female vocal, they said we want it to be a female vocal. And the rest of it was really up to me. So, you literally just, whatever comes to mind, you put it down, and then you decide, is that right or not? And then you just go and go and go.
And, like I said, I wanted to give them two very different ideas. And one of the two was the basic Crimson Cloud, and the other one is gone. So it really was pretty quick to get to the core of Crimson Cloud, and then months to take that and make it into the track I'd do here at the game. Not every day, of course, but I'd work on it for a day or two, and then they'd go away and think about it, and then they'd come back. I'd work on it for a couple of days, and I'd be doing other projects too. But it really was weeks and weeks of thinking and refining and redoing. But yeah, it all starts with it being in a laboratory. You're experimenting and experimenting with a character who you actually need to know quite well.
From my understanding, that kind of proof of concept, that base was already fairly early on, and the producers were happy with it, and they said, okay, this is it, just expand it, and
yes,
we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah, and I don't think they knew at first how much where it would go. They would hear something and they'd say, we like it or we don't like it. Pretty simple.
So let's talk a bit about Subhuman, because you already told in the beginning that you were approached to make Dante's theme, but that's all to Cody Matthew Johnson. So what was your contribution to that track, and did you have too much on your plate, or did you just fully gave it to Cody and kind of oversaw it, and how was that process of your...
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I felt the song had to be written by a guitar player, by a real rock guitar player, and Cody Matthew Johnson is a great rock artist. He's also very cinematic, and I've known Cody and worked with him for many years. So I just felt his talents were the right talents to do this right. And he wrote it on a guitar. He actually went out and bought this new 9-string guitar, and it's this badass, guitar. And so the song got written, with his fingers and with those kinds of heavy rock phrasing that wouldn't be the same if I did it on keyboards. So the first thing I did was I said, I think Cody is the right guy. Listen to what he did on Marvel versus Capcom Infinite, and they said, you're right. He's a badass. So I got Cody started. We, again, Capcom gave us a great start to think about to think about the style. They had certain ideas, and of course, to some degree, comes from previous games. But again, they wanted a fresh theme, but with some reference to the kind of the badass rock of prior. And from there, I just helped put the whole thing together. We brought in the other musicians. We looked for singers. I helped out with some of the lyrics. I was there for all the recording sessions. I was there to help mix it. But I let Cody really do what Cody does, and that's what a producer does anyway. My job was to make sure that Cody's work was absolutely top notch. And I think he did a great piece. I love Subhuman. I love Devil Trigger too. I think Casey's phenomenal.
One of the questions I got was like, what was your opinion about the other tracks, and especially on Subhuman, and do you think you could have made it better?
I made it as good as it can be. I mean, I helped Cody do what needed to be done to produce a great track. But he's so smart. He knows this. He knows the style. He speaks it so much more fluently than I do. But, I understand video games. I understand the cinematic world. I understood, I think I was just a good second pair of ears who also helped pull all the other logistics together, just what it took to get into the studio, get the song recorded, make sure Capcom was happy if they weren't, work with the team to make sure we understood what they wanted. But honestly, Cody doesn't need his handheld. He's a great artist, so I'm super happy with the way it turned out.
Great. That's great.
And Michael Barr is a great singer.
Yeah.
He, I didn't know him. It's so funny. I actually knew about him from his previous band, which is pretty well known here in LA, called Volumes.
Okay.
It was kind of a metal band. And I'd heard of them before. And he had left the band a couple years earlier. And he's actually made a transition into a much gentler style of music for his solo work. But he's just, fuck me, man. He just really, when you say, please kick ass in front of a microphone, he was a beast.
Yeah, his vocals on Subhuman, it was like the perfect fit.
Yeah, we also did that right here in my studio. Again, That was a demo that became the final recording.
Yeah, most of the time the things that you're doing experimenting, usually you get it on the first or second try, and then you kind of stick with that.
Yep.
Have you kind of seen how everything has turned out in the game?
I've been on Twitch a little bit and on YouTube. It was the first time I got to really see and hear it. Was on Friday, just a couple days ago.
Okay.
It was funny. I was sick, so I was watching it in bed. So.
and how was your reaction? Everything saw how it was implemented, and
it's absolutely fabulous. What can I say? Capcom and the whole team who did this. The work that they put into it it's mind-boggling to me. It's important to emphasize that what I did is collaborative. I couldn't do it by myself, but they counted on me to do something that they couldn't do. But really, it wasn't about me or them. It's about what we did together, the Capcom team and me, having a dialogue that went on for many months. Let's try an experiment. Did it work? Yeah, we love it. Did it work? Well, maybe it could be a little different. So, they're like a movie director, but their vision is so deep, and that's what I learned from watching the video, is that so much more. I knew that I fully understood the depth of creativity that they could do and would do, but to see it was shocking. I've worked on games. I've worked on films that had a lot of missing effects. When I've done science fiction television, the effects come after me. So, I'm so used to working on things where there's like a blue screen or just a card that says, the monster runs, flies away or whatever.
Yes.
I'm very used to that. So my job is to use my imagination. And that's what I did here, like anybody would do. But to see it finally fully rendered, fully realized, fully interactive, was amazing. Because when I went, the few clips that I worked to when I was writing were so partially rendered. They were blocky, and there was no texture, no shading, objects passing through each other. I mean, it was really they were just getting to the style of battle, and that's what they wanted me to see. So I had really not even a minute of V with two of his creatures, and that was that. So but the Capcom team would not let me fail. They would make sure that I understood what everything meant from the perspective of Crimson Cloud.
Like, there's a difference between making scores, music for movies, TV shows, and games. What do you like to do the most? Because I do think it's kind of a different approach and mentality, isn't it? Or you're absolutely right. It's a different approach and a different mentality, but music is music. There are some parts of writing music for games that's a little freer, a little more uninhibited. Why? Because when you're scoring film and TV, the picture is there and it's locked. It's done. It's 100% cutscene, and if you will. And that means that when she reaches for the gun, I have to do something in the music. And when it cuts to the next day, I have to make changes. So
in many ways, the form and structure of the music, my hands are a little bit tied by the editing. So the structure of the music is more like literary. It's more like telling a story, and the pace of the story has been decided before me. With games, it's a little more free because there is no other than cutscenes, which are like, I think of those really as, little movies in between the majority. And cutscenes are a very small part of most games. The freedom that I don't have to worry that, in 4.7 seconds, she picks up the gun, and in 31.1 seconds, it cuts to the next day, and I have to prepare for that musically. I mean, I enjoy that. I'm very used to that. That's cinematic music. But with games, you do have this ability to just create the moment and exist in a moment. And that moment is a character or a battle or a puzzle, whatever it is. You're there, and you're there from beginning to end. And then, of course, you create it in a way that the player has the ability, to make certain shifts. And in, other games that I've done, the interaction has been somewhat simpler in Far Cry and in God of War. In the other games I've worked on, there was actually very little I had to do to give the music as much interaction and flexibility for the player as there is. So I love scoring film. I love scoring television. I love telling stories. I love being part of telling stories. Video games give me that same feeling of writing music that exists for the emotion of the music. I always think of music purely from the perspective of emotion. I can't think of the music in any other way other than to structure it to fit if it needs to be structured to fit. But it's about creating a feeling, whether it's about the character or the plot or the dialogue or transitions or edits, whatever it is. I'm there to bring a higher level of emotion to whatever experience the audience is having. And whether they're sitting in a movie theater or in front of a television or with, their controller, in their hands, my job isn't that different. It's to convey emotion and bring an experience. If you want to put it in one word, what I do for a living is I create experiences. And that's as good as it gets. And it doesn't change whether it's a video game or something else.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Because whether you're watching a movie or playing a game, I do always think that the audio is as much important as the visual, what you're seeing. And if one of them lacks, then it could kind of break the whole thing together.
I agree.
That was it, Jeff. I had a great time learning about this whole stuff as a gaming fan, but also as a content creator. Thanks a lot for doing this and taking the time to do this interview.
Thank you so much, Loris.
And there you have it, guys. I hope you really enjoyed watching and listening to the interview as much as I did having a great talk with Jeff. And I want to thank Jeff again for taking the time and doing this interview with me, as it was an honor. And I hope you guys appreciate and enjoyed as well and learned more about the creation of the track. Because in the end, it's all about the team collaboration and the team effort to strive for one goal, making a great game. And with that game comes with a great soundtrack. And while you're still here, guys, why don't you like and share this video, as that helps me greatly, and become a subscriber to my channel. And you can also find me on my social media pages, simply at YellowMotion, and on Instagram at YellowMotion Gaming. That'll do it for me for this one. Once again, guys, thanks a lot for being here and thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.